Hi, I'm Christopher Hine. Today we're going to be talking about knife disarms in Aikido. People are often really excited about knife disarms. There's kind of a theory in the Aikido community right now that maybe Aikido doesn't actually have any good knife disarms. And I think that's kind of ridiculous. So we're going to talk about that today. All right, so knife disarms, and what are knife disarms, and why is that important to Aikido people? What does that even have to do with anything? So knife disarms are really interesting to a lot of people because you see them in movies a lot. So because you see knife disarms in movies, you're sure that knife disarms happen all the time. Then to compound that desire to deal with knives, you look at YouTube videos or something and you see a real life situation where someone tries to stab someone else and you think yourself, man, if I was in that situation, I'd really like to know a knife disarm and that could really help me. So knife disarms can be functionally important, and of course they're exciting because they're in movies. Important thing to understand is Aikido has all the knife disarms you're ever going to need, right? So knife disarms as a whole are contained inside of Aikido. A lot of people don't believe that's true, and so they're like, oh, you got to go to other martial arts systems in order to learn knife disarms. That's not true. The core lessons are all inside of Aikido already. You probably just don't know that they're in there. Now, your personal ability to disarm a knife is dependent upon how much you train that in a live situation, right? So no one can give you the techniques and then you can just instantly do them, right? So, and even if you train them a whole bunch, you can't just instantly do them when someone's actually trying to stab you with a knife. So we're going to talk today about what those core techniques are, and then we're going to talk about the training that you might need to do in order to get good at those things. I'm going to call Josh out here. We're going to go to work. Josh? All right, so knife disarms. Let's talk about them. So knife disarms are exciting to people because they see them in the movies. That's super exciting. And Aikido has some knife disarms. People go, oh, you know, I've seen a couple in demonstrations, so maybe Aikido has a lot of those, and that's cool. And then there's also a counterpoint to people inside the Aikido community now who are starting to try and look outside of Aikido for knife disarms because they believe Aikido knife disarms are bad, and there's this kind of little thing that's going on inside of Aikido that's like, oh, knife disarms are bad. Aikido is no good at knife disarms. That's a bunch of crap. So that's as bold as I can be about it. Look. Aikido has the basic set of fundamental techniques that you will need for knife disarming, okay? The way you disarm someone with a knife is you first weaken their grip and then you take the knife out of their hand. So that's the most direct way, right? And of course there's other ways, punch them in the face and maybe they'll let go of it, all kinds of other stuff could happen. But as far as directly taking something out of someone's hand, you're going to weaken the grip and take it out. So let me show you what I mean with that. So if Josh has this knife here, okay, if I were able to pull on the knife this way, it wouldn't be a very successful way to pull on the knife, right? So because he's strong, right, I won't be able to pull it. So it's hard for me to get that out of his hand. Unless, of course, he opens his hand like he just did, right? Then he can get it out of there, right? And that's what happens a lot of times in demonstrations is the uke knows they're supposed to let go, so they just open their hand. The guy goes, oh, look, and you could disarm anyway, right? And that would have worked. But in order to get this out of his hand, I need to first weaken his grip. So what are the ways I could weaken his grip? Well, I want to lengthen the ligaments in his arm as much as I possibly can to make his grip weak, right? So the ligaments in his arm only go so far. And then once those have been stretched to their max, he will have a hard time gripping something, right? It'll be real hard for him to grab something. One of the ways to lengthen those ligaments is to twist the wrist this way, right? So by twisting it, I'm really stretching out everything in his arm here, and that grip's getting weaker and weaker and weaker until it gets to a point where it's relatively easy to take out of the hand. Right now, that's relative to how strong this guy is, how used to having his arm twisted this way he is. But as far as, you know, an average person, that's going to be the way to totally get it out of their hand. Okay, now another way to get it out is to turn it over this way, and I can turn it here, and again, I've lengthened all those ligaments in his forearm, and it's easy to get that knife out of his hand, right? Okay, another way I could do it is I could fold this wrist down totally flat like this. So those are the basic core ways. Okay, now in Aikido, we call this way to lengthen these ligaments in his arm kote gaish, right? Kote is wrist, gaish means to turn over. So I'm turning over the wrist right here, and that's how I'm lengthening those to get that out. If we turn it this way and add a little upward pressure, we call that ni kyo, right? So that's second principle. If I turn it all the way this way, that becomes sankyo, right? So third principle. So those are the core ways. Now I can also fold his wrist down like this. We call this gokyo. This is fifth lesson, and it comes out of the hand. So those are the ways in which you're going to weaken the arm and get something out of someone's hand. And you can see we have all of those in Aikido. And in fact, not only do we have them, they are major techniques. So when you hear the word kyo in Aikido, that means a principle. So ikkyo through rokyo are our 6 major principles. Now you can see that we have 3 of those right here. And then also kotagaishi, which is one of Aikido's major techniques, which is this, to turn the wrist over. That is also included in these. Now if you look at video of any other knife system doing disarms of this flavor, right, so meaning to directly take it out, which is the most common way to disarm something, you're going to see those 4 things over and over, right? So you're going to see kotagaishi, you're going to see gokyo, you're going to say nikyo, and you're going to see sankyo. So those are the 4 things you're going to see repeatedly. Doesn't matter if you look at Filipino knife disarms, European knife disarms, Chinese knife disarms, doesn't matter what. If we're taking something out of the hand, those are the 4 ways you're going to do it. Those are 4 principles in Aikido. Okay, now those principles aside, how are we actually going to do that, right? So that's the rough technique, right? So the rough technique is to manipulate his arm into one of those ways. But how am I actually then going to take it out? Okay, now if we look at kotagaishi. In kotagaishi, the technique commonly in most schools looks something like this, right? This is a very common way to do a kotagaishi. Now, what's happening in the kotagaishi? This hand that's towards the handle is pushing the knife like this. Okay, this hand is pulling the knife like this. When we put those together, we get a good way to pop the knife out of someone's hand. So in a classic kotagaishi technique that's practiced all over in Aikido schools, we're pushing on this side, pulling on this side, and that's our knife disarm. Now, unfortunately, we're from a culture that's currently obsessed with unarmed martial arts. Why we're obsessed with unarmed martial arts, I don't know. But in that, we're sure that kotagaishi is this, and you see all kinds of weird applications, people pushing their thumbs in, all kinds of weird things. People will complain about crossing your thumbs or all these weird things. This is weird obsession about tiny minutia that's not important to the technique. Grossly, the technique goes like this. Now, when you see it in its proper application, which is not an unarmed application, it's done like this, and that's wrenching something out of someone's hand. Now, I could do that if he had a spear in his hand, if he had a bow and arrow in his hand, if he had a gun in his hand, if he had a knife in his hand, it doesn't matter what he has in his hand. I can disarm in that method, and that's an Aikido method, a common Aikido method. Nikyo. All right, now in a lot of schools, you will see things like this. Right? So you see where they're popping the knife out of someone's hand like that, and they're going against the blade and popping it out. And you'll see that in Filipino systems, you see it in Chinese systems, you see it all kinds of ways. All right, in Aikido, we have essentially that same technique, but it's done with the side of your shoulder like this, okay? And that's called nikyo, and that's a very classic application of nikyo to get something out of someone's hand, okay? Now, it might scare you to see the knife blade is near my body, right? When you're dealing with knives, the knife is going to be near your body. It's a close range situation. If you've lost all of your ability to keep ma'ai, good distancing, then you're going to see that over and over again. The knife is close to the body. Now, if the knife is close to the body, I want it near a part of the body that it's not going to hurt me, as opposed to near a part of the body where it's going to hurt me, right? So I'm putting it at one of the best places I possibly could put it, and then I'm going to use my body to crank that knife out of there, right? So that disarm, which is very common to lots of styles of martial arts, is also existent in Aikido, right? For Sankyo, let me maybe come to this side for me. For Sankyo, let's say we're working the arm down here. I'm going to try to avoid my microphone, so sorry if it goes loud for you. So I'm right here like this. Okay, now what am I going to do? Well, he's going to be moving his arm all over, right? So if I get to this position, I can crank with my whole body this way to apply Sankyo. Now again, when we're in obsessive culture, right? Our culture's obsessed with unarmed martial arts. Then we see this, and this is, Sankyo looks like that, so it must be a wrist lock. And we don't ever stop to think that it's me putting both my hands on the knife and turning as hard as I can to drive that knife back towards this guy, right? So that is what Aikido Kyowaza techniques are trying to do to make the disarms. And you can see those constantly throughout the techniques of Aikido. They're all over the place. Now, if you're good at them or not is what's important. So how do you get good at that? Well, you need a set of drills to help you get good at that. Let's call Maya out and see if she can help us. All right, so now we got our 2 trainers out here, and I got a bum knee, so I'm no good for this. All right, so we're going to talk about some methods to train you to be better at disarming. Now, we've already shown some of these basic techniques, but we're going to kind of get into a little bit more of a live practice with it so you guys can see a little more. Now, right now, we're using a dull steel trainer, right? So actually, this is an aluminum trainer. There is no edge on this at all, right? It's flatter than the back of a normal knife, right? So it's super, super flat. All the edges have been rounded, so it's purpose-built for this training. I will still say when you start training live with this stuff, that steel is really still hard on your body. If you get whacked real hard like this, it still is no fun. Wood is a little better than that. Rubber is way better than that, and foam is even better yet than that. The problem with that is as the knife becomes really flexible, then a lot of stuff where you're pushing on the blade will not be available to you, because in foam, your hand just goes through and doesn't disarm anything. Rubber, not much better. Wood works pretty good. So you choose the trainer that's appropriate for what you're doing. Okay, so first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to have Maya go through just some basic disarm techniques with Josh. Now, we are using a knife, and this video is specifically built towards working with knife disarms, although these can be done for anything. You're going to see these basic ways that we've done before in other videos, right? So in this, first thing we're going to do is we're going to have Maya place her hands on Josh. Right? So right on that knife there somewhere. All right, so now she's got a hold to the knife. Now she always wants to grab with two. Actually, let me have you switch guys to the other hand real quick just so they can see this. Okay, so she always wants to be working two on the one. Now, here's why. Because now she's got a slight strength advantage, right? So Josh would have to be twice as strong with this one arm as Maya is with her two arms in order for him to be stronger than her. Okay, the second reason for that is there's always the potential for him to switch that knife. So if her hand wasn't there, he could easily switch that knife over. That's no good. So she always wants one hand blocking the opening of his hand. So whenever she's working a knife disarm, one hand's always covering the opening of his hand. So that's a real important set to get into. And Aikido techniques almost always account for this in exactly this way. All right, now what she wants to do is figure out ways to disarm. So this is just a real chill practice where Maya is working through how, if I had Josh like this, could I get the knife out? And she's going to work through a few different situations. Okay, she got a Kodagaishi there. She got a Nikyo there. And another Kodagaishi, right? Okay, so you can see, you just let her work through this, right? So she can work through a ton of different ones, and there's no stress in this situation. So she can actually see the techniques of Aikido, formulate in her head where she needs to go to disarm that technique. Okay, now we're going to move up from this. So next we're going to create a situation where maybe Josh was cutting at her. So he's going to start out in this position, and Maya's already got a defensive position up. Okay, now look, this is normal. Maybe this looks crazy to you if you're obsessed with unarmed martial arts, but for armed martial arts, this is super normal. This guy tried to cut into her. She stuck her hand out like this because she was freaked out. And so that's the position they got into. Okay, now from here, what Josh is going to do is really casually move the knife around to cut Maya. Okay, so that's what he's trying to do. He's moving it around to cut Maya. Maya's just going to flow with it wherever he moves it around, just like that. Perfect. Okay, now what's going to happen is Maya, from this kind of real chilled out practice, is going to go close in and try to get to that 2-on-1 position and then make that into the disarm, right? And you saw right when she clicked into gear, right? So you saw it. She was kind of moving slow. She didn't know. And then the second her body got to the position she knew, she boom, disarmed that sucker, right? Okay, that's what we're looking to train. And that should come from that first practice, the very first practice, there we go, where she's learning, that's a good position for me to get Kodagaishi, right? So now when we translate that to this second drill, where it's still no stress here, she's moving around, she starts to see that same exact position, and there she goes. Now she knows how to get the Nikyo out, right? So really easy stepwise progression, and that's slow, but it adds a little more stress. Now understand, it's not a big deal, but it's a little bit of stress, so we're getting her mind used to dealing with stress. Now from this real chilled out practice, we're going to go to a slightly faster practice where Josh is just moving faster from this same situation. There we go. We got that same technique out. Okay, now from that, we're going to go to a practice where they don't have connection. And this should look really similar to Aikido people. This is often called Jiwaza, right? So this is a Jiwaza practice where Josh is going to really lightly give some very simple strikes. Now look, these are the strikes that no one thinks are any good because they're used to unarmed martial arts culture. But cutting like this is normal, cutting like this is normal, cutting like this is normal. So now that we got a knife in the hand, these should be very normal strikes. Josh is going to lightly move around with Maya. Maya's going to try to get into defended position. So as they're moving around, she's going to try to defend and keep that knife from getting to her. And then she's going to try to get to the position that she knows she can disarm from. All right, so we see that practice next. Now notice, Josh is not just waiting for her to take it out of his hand, but he's also not really actively trying to mess her up, right? He's not trying to hurt her or to really get her or make her feel stupid, right? And so Maya's having to work through these different scenarios, right? Every time she's looking for that same position, and then once she's comfortable, she's going to work that disarm. All right, so this is no resistance from Josh as far as when Maya's trying to apply the technique. No resistance from Josh at all. All he's doing now is he's add the spontaneity of he's going to do some different kinds of cuts. So he's trying some different stabs in there, cutting in different directions. But for Maya, once we get to this basic kind of position, she should already have some programming for that. Now, of course, she should also have programming from here and also programming from here. And you can work all those things in as you go. But now because Josh is coming in a variety of different ways, she can then get to the position and learn to disarm from there. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to do that same exact practice at the same speed, I hope. But now Josh is actually going to try to resist a little bit. So when Maya goes to take it out of his arm, he can recover his arm, he can try to push her off, and Maya's still going to try to work those same disarms. Okay, same speed though, so still pretty mellow. She got a Nikyo there. Nikyo again. Kotagaish. He switched there on her. Good. All right, very good. All right. So you can see this is still super light. We're still being super cool. No one's really trying to get anyone, but he's giving her more and more difficulty as we progress, right? So there he switched the knife, or she gets it, he kind of tries to pull his hand free. He's not making it easy for her as we're going to this. Okay, now next we're going to go ahead and grab a plastic trainer. Okay, Video Magic, we're back with the plastic trainer here, so it's a rubber trainer. And the reason I switched to this is because we're going to amp it up now. And so look, it's not really as good for Maya to practice the specifics of disarming, which is kind of some of the stuff we already worked right now, with this knife because it's soft. So meaning she pushes on the blade at all, it's going to give, and so it's not really great for practicing the actual disarming manipulations. But now we do this because I want Josh to more actively come in to actually stab and cut at Maya. And so if Maya takes too many with this piece of steel, it's really bad, right? So we've all come away with tons of little bruises and some little injuries, and teeth get endangered. All kinds of things happen. So I've gone to rubber, so that way it's just easier for us to do. Okay, now we're going to do the same practice, but I'm going to ask Josh to amp it up a little bit more. And so now he's actually going to actively try and keep Maya from getting it. Now he's still going to actively give cuts. So he's not going to fence, right? He's not going to stay in this position. He's not going to be dodgy. He's still just going to move in, and he's going to give cuts. But every time she gets a hold of it, he's going to try to recover his hand and keep her from getting it. So he's not trying to facilitate her disarming anymore. Now he's facilitating her getting to a stable position that maybe she could disarm from. All right, so let's give that a try. Good, Josh is going to give her a real hard time now. There we go. All right, Yame, we're way off camera. Okay, all right, so no, that's totally fine. All right, so there we're starting to amp up. Now we could still go a little harder. They're being a little sweet to each other right now because they want to make a video, right? So, but you can see how that's going to amp up and amp up and amp up. And that's what we want. We want to amp up. Now as we make that sacrifice for trainers, he's going to focus more on stabbing her, working that knife more, and he's going to focus more on moving his body around and getting free, as opposed to before where he was pretty much giving her the knife but allowing her to really work the details of the disarm. So now we're a progression up. Okay. Now, from here, a lot of people are probably going to ask, like, well, so Josh should be cagey and dodgy, right? Okay, so meaning the way he should do is he should have the knife in a defended position, right? So like that, he's in a defended position, and he should be trying to keep Maya out every time Maya comes in, so go ahead and fake coming in, right? And then he should try and grab her and stab her up, right? Okay, and that's a valid thing. All right, now the problem for this is in the system of Aikido, we don't run into someone with a knife. So if Josh goes into a defended position, switch so they can see the knife. Josh goes into a defended position. We train Maya to never run into this position. She should never run into this position. So in the system of Aikido, she should just never practice this. So if Josh gets dodgy and cagey like this, Maya will just stand back, and it will be a very boring minute or however long we run the scenario, because she doesn't want to ever run into this position. Now, what that will do if Josh wants to engage is draw Josh out of a defended position and into an offensive position. So you see here, he's gone into an offensive position. Now, this looks a lot more like the drill. And then from this, he's going to cut, okay? Now, we can run a full-on scenario, and we'll run one for you here right now, okay? We're going to run a full-on scenario, and you can see what's going on where Josh is actually doing that. And every time Josh is cagey, Maya should be training herself to stay out of that distance. And then when Josh is provoked into coming for her, then the Aikido techniques will naturally appear. Okay, so I'm going to get out of frame here and let these guys go. We're going to go for a minute on them, and we'll see what we get. Good job, Tom. All right, so there you have the final version of that drill. One of the things you'll notice in that is Maya spent most of her time trying to stay out of distance, and that's because that's what she wants to do, is stay out of distance. It's dangerous when you get in close with that knife, right? A knife and a small action can end your life. So she doesn't want to grapple with that guy if she can avoid it. Now, only when the situation gets pressed in so much that getting out is not an option anymore will Maya try and transition to a set of skills that allows her to take the knife out. But again, she's not trying to grapple with this guy. Understand, she's envisioning a scenario where this guy's bigger than her, stronger than her, better trained than her, all that stuff. So she doesn't want to mess around with it. If she can get a quick disarm, she will. And you saw a couple in there. She got a couple disarms, right? So that's not, getting disarms is not like in the movies where every time someone stabs in with you, you can train yourself to perfectly get out of the way and disarm. That's not going to happen in an actual live practice. Now, in a grappling practice where you start out at grappling range and the knife comes out, you're going to get to do more of that disarm. Now, that practice is strictly outside of Aikido, and on this channel, we've done that practice for you guys. You can see it. If you want to see a comment below, and we'll put in more of those. But those are the basic techniques you're going to use. They already exist in Aikido. And the basic ways they're going to come up pretty much already exists in Aikido. So outside of studying a grappling system, Aikido does what it needs to do for disarms. Knife disarms aren't as magical as you think they are, right? So in the movies, they look real cool, but in real life, they don't actually come up all that often. You might get one, it might save your life, they're good to know, good to practice, but they shouldn't be the be-all, end-all of your training. You're never going to train yourself to the level where every time someone stabs you with a knife, you catch their hand and you twist it out of their hand, then you're the victorious guy with the knife. Also important to understand on the other side, because you see this a lot where Aikido people say like, oh man, you should never use a knife in a fight because what if they take the knife from you, which is the most insane logic on earth. You see in that where Josh very seldomly had the knife taken from him, right? So moving quickly, recovering the knife as fast as you can, making good cuts and getting out of there, that's what you should be doing when you have the knife. And if you do that most of the time, you're probably not going to be disarmed. So I'm Christopher Hine. I hope that shed a little light on knife disarms for you. Take care.